So just really quick before I begin, I have two versions of this slideshow. This is in a PDF format, so if at any point anyone's not seeing like any part of the slide, please let me know. I'll swap to a different page over here.
Perfect. At the moment, it seems quite clear.
Okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and jump in. I'm actually really happy that I'm going after Jonas's presentation because it's almost like a triangulation of where my content is. Just to reiterate what Jonas already told us, like data is a very, very valuable industry. It's extremely valuable, it's very competitive. There was a comedian a while ago that was very popular in saying that people shouldn't be so narcissistic about their data. You know, why do you think your cat pictures are so valuable and this and that? Well, the reason it's valuable is because a lot of our behaviors of how we share data is pretty predictable. And once it's predictable, you can create business models on top of that. You can go to a board of investors and say, I know that this amount of traffic is going to appear at this place on this topic. People are going to be sharing cat pictures on this Reddit thread, and we can do targeted ads with that. That's just like one very like straightforward thing that people can do with our seemingly very mundane data. Things that you say on Facebook, pictures that you share on Instagram, all of those things generate value. And those value are not squarely falling back on the generator of the data, but often into the hands of the handler of the data. Yeah, that's just a little bit of background. So a type of data online that I'm interested in here is hate speech, or what people are calling toxic speech. So speech is already a type of data we have online, speech about all kinds of stuff, banal stuff, academic stuff, political stuff, medical stuff, this and that. And a small subset of speech is hate speech or toxic speech. So what is hate speech? Just you know, give us like to bracket in our topic here. Usually people understand hate speech as things like threats, physical threats, threats of character, obscenities, speech that involve toxicity of certain kind, disrespectful speech, ad hominem attacks like belittling someone, diminishing someone, misappropriating someone's experience. That's considered hate speech for some people. And for some people, this is a little bit more controversial. Inflammatory speech is hate speech. So the content of hate speech, it's not without controversy, but it's one of those things where people seem to say, when I see it, I know, I can identify it. So hate speech is a problem that we have online. In my paper, I made a reference to the human rights crisis going on in Myanmar. Since very, very early on, Facebook completely forwent its responsibility to take care of online speech moderation in Myanmar. So a lot of toxicity, a lot of sort of digital trash, as it were, got left around, and it festered into a much, much bigger problem. As of today, 1 million people were displaced from their home because government officials were given a blank check on what they can say online and who they can say it to, when they can say it, that type of stuff. So just from that experience alone, we know that moderation is necessary. It's necessary that we have some rules of how to engage with each other, what to say on what kind of online community, whether it's big or small. Moderation in the context of a small online community, like maybe a group of academic researchers, maybe a PhD program, you know, there are certain rules, what's appropriate to say at work, and this can change from country to country, from program to program, and academics are not the only human beings that have online communities. So sometimes in a small community, moderation is very easy. People can talk to each other, get an understanding of what we in our group think is appropriate, and then we follow those rules. We try to be considerate, we try to give extra miles, we try to do some extra work for other people. We try to give other people some extra room. Sometimes these issues are easy to solve. We can just be kind to people and problems sort of go away. But there's also a larger scale. On larger scale, there's bigger versions of this problem where we need not any type of moderation, but we need commercial online content moderation, where we might need tens of thousands or even more moderators, either working in a hub or working from home, going through tens of thousands pieces of content, that is Facebook posts or videos, pictures, blog posts, or even metadata sometimes, music, what have you. Tens of thousands of pieces of content in a day for tens of thousands of people. So this is a different issue than how we should relate to each other in a small online community. So moderation is our putative solution to hate speech. Now, a question that some people might want to ask is, we have very sophisticated AI. Can AI take care of hate speech? Well, the short answer is no, not in any time soon. So just to give a couple of hints of how big the challenge is for machines. One of the best machine filters out there is from Google. It's called Perspective API. You can actually go on, follow this domain name and find this API yourself. You can type in any sentence in English and actually now a couple of other languages to check its toxicity, its threat level, its level of respectfulness, its level of obscenity and stuff like that. And as to cite some research from other people, I'll give the project names later. As of 2018, I believe, here are a couple of ridiculous mistakes this supposed best filter makes, right? If you say "I love you" in Chinese, that speech is 36% toxic for some reason. And if you say "have a good day" in Farsi, that speech is toxic for some reason. But if you say stuff like "I love Hitler," that speech is 3% toxic. It's very interesting. There's a lot of nuances that it seems very easy to fool machines, basically, is a problem right now. And I'm sure a lot of you guys saw just 2 weeks ago on the news, the US intelligence community warned that a lot of militant terrorists are using memes to communicate with each other. Memes are like this encoded kind of language. You only need to, people use very creative and sophisticated ways to implicate certain propositions without ever asserting it, without ever coming close to asserting it. So it's easy to fool machines. So we need people moderators to get better. And my project is a very simple, very simple simulation to take a look at whether or not that idea is ridiculous to improve people, and what kind of ways can we think of to improve people is the idea of this project. So I built a very simple simulation environment. The most difficult piece of math you need to understand for this model is addition. There's nothing but addition going on in this model, just many of it. There's about 1,000 agents. Each agent goes through about 1,000 decisions. And the idea here is to have, number one, agents be able to make type 1 and type 2 errors. It's possible for an agent to look at a piece of content that is permissible and say, I don't think so, this is not permissible. And it's able to look at a piece of content that's not permissible and say, I think this is fine. Agents are able to make that kind of mistake. This is the control group behavior. The idea is to have agents compare answers in 2 kinds of ways, and then seeing whether or not, and seeing whether or not it's possible for human beings to improve their behavior on a very artistic basis. That is, if you make a right answer, I give you a point. If you give a wrong answer, I don't give you a point. And then we tabulate in that type of way to see if it's ridiculous at all that human beings can get better. So this first approach I want to look at, or I looked at, is based on something I'm sure everybody knows called Condorcet's jury theorem. This is a simple mathematical theorem that was cited in a lot of literature to justify representative democracy. Because the theorem says that if your population has more competent knowers than incompetent ones, and if everyone's making decisions autonomously in this population, then the decision of a majority of the voters is more likely to be correct than that of the minority. So this is a kind of a simple play on, if you got a bigger sample size, your sample probably acts more like the population. So if your entire population is pretty competent on an issue, a smaller sample size of that population is more likely to veer away from the epistemic feature of the entire population. So based on this simple theorem, imagine that if you were running a moderation hub, now I say double your budget, triple your budget, quadruple your budget, to have every decision become a team decision by 2, 3, 4 people. What happens? This table very simply shows that. On the x-axis, we see what I'm calling feedback mass. So over here, if you're seeing my cursor, this is what happens. This is the benchmark success rate. Over here is the benchmark success rate of what happens when we don't have feedback. As we add 1 helper, as we add 2 helpers and 3 helpers, the success rate of the population does go up. And over here on the y-axis, I involved something called community slant. How each decision is made in this model is agents perceive the right answer, and then they have a bias that drives them away from the answer. So this bias is generated on a Gaussian distribution. So over here on the y-axis, we're seeing the mean of this distribution. You can think of the y-axis as representing how competent your population to begin with is, your population of moderators on some issue. If everyone is by 30%, if most people are in the beginning by 30% off, then the voting results start to act a little bit different. It's one of the most interesting results I want to point to. Well, one result I want to gloss over first is, as you notice, the more slanted the community bias is, the less effective kind of voting became. Over here. And another really interesting result I wanted to point out is, in practice, if we wanted to implement something like this, it's really important to notice when some of these procedures can backfire. And as you see in these two situations, the reliability of the group definitely went down, and not just by a little bit, by a significant small portion. So this is what happens when your population is already not so good, and we're only doubling our budget and personnel. Then it actually makes our result worse. This is not to say that in application, there's a golden rule here, always triple your budget. This is not what this is saying at all. This is saying that there is some kind of contour in the data here. It's not a straight line, and I can't tell you where the contour is, but I can tell you there is some kind of contour. So over here, this is just one kind of procedure that I'm considering. What happens if every decision becomes a team decision? A drawback of this kind of way of doing it is it's very expensive. Companies need to actually find practical ways of doing this. And the reality is moderators are already not getting paid enough, and the treatment of their work is also in very abysmal conditions. This is still a very, very putative solution, just to look at whether or not it does anything at all conceptually if we try to involve some teamwork. Another kind of approach I want to consider is, what if moderators, suppose we have a well-respected, well-incentivized, and well-compensated workforce, and suppose that the agents actually cared about improving their professional opinions. So in some testimony literature, there's discussions in the past where ordinary knowers have the ability to compartmentalize their views. For example, a teacher who teaches evolution to a satisfactory degree doesn't have to sincerely believe in evolution herself. She might be a creationist in private, but she's still able to competently teach the issue. I think moderators can, we should aspire to, at least aspire to an online environment where moderators also have this kind of attitude about their professional attitude. And suppose in this kind of a world, or in this kind of a workforce, people care to improve their opinion. In this kind of condition, let's suppose we don't double, triple the budget. We simply add something like 1 extra hour of work to everybody, and everyone takes a diligent look at what the peer feedback is saying and correct their decision procedure just by a little bit in the direction of their peers, whether it's right or wrong. If people simply follow their peers a little bit, respect the opinions of their peers or feedback, does this in some way help? Can this like sort of rein in, as it were, the more sort of outlier judges to make everyone, to make the group more competent? And there's some preliminary data says that that kind of expectation is also not ridiculous. It might not be ridiculous, but there's definitely times that that could backfire too. So first, let's take a really quick look at the community slant on the y-axis. So if the group is off center by a little bit, but not too much, 10%, let's say here's the benchmark success rate of how they judge a particular type of hate speech. If we simply allow 1% of the moderators to receive feedback, and if we simply have a couple of people, 1, 2, 3 people, helping those 1% of feedback receivers, this way everyone only has about 1 extra hour of work every day. This is the improvement on the success rate. It's very, very minimal, but there's kind of a trend here. So it is interesting that it does something. As the community slant increases, our expectation gets downgraded. And when the community is, very slanted, the eventual effect is not something we want to fall below. It could fall below the benchmark success rate if people were not talking to each other. So here's a more detailed look at what happens in this more idealized world where moderators cared about their own professional opinions, cared to improve their professional capacity to make this kind of judgment. So let's look at this figure on the top left. So this light gray region represents the population of agents that were only a little bit biased. This slightly darker region represents agents that were a little bit more biased. And as we go down on the color grade, agents become more and more biased. So this is a distribution of the starkness of the agent's bias. And as we see, as agents communicated with each other, there's kind of a trend of convergence. There's some kind of like line or point of convergence that the agents are going onto. And this is not surprising because the theoretical basis for this idea is something called convergence in opinion dynamics. So if a group of people doing the same measurements, they talk to each other, they can use each other's random error and biases, if they were biased in different directions, to pull on each other, tug each other, to make the whole group a little bit more precise, or a little bit more accurate. But this is also not a guaranteed result, because convergence does not guarantee, or it's not by nature conducive to truth. It's not that we not necessarily that we talk to more people to make the same measurements, our overall results get better, because as we see right here, in these two situations, if our whole community is off by 2%, sorry, 20%, 30% on average, then, sorry, not 20%. If our community is off by 30% on average, then it doesn't take much feedback at all to drag us all down. This is because convergence it's very much built into the name of the phenomenon. Convergence is guarantees that we get closer to each other. If we don't surround the truth, if our if our population of knowers don't somehow surround the truth on abstract space, then our median position would not approximate truth. So this is a condition that this kind of model needs to satisfy. Basically, whatever kind of hopeful, potentially helpful teamwork that you're doing on an actual moderation hub, the moderation hub itself needs to already be pretty good. Okay, I'm going to quickly discuss some concerns on this very, very simple model. The biggest concern that I heard some people say is that this kind of model, the issue space is one-dimensional. This is not how moderators go through work. In this model, the signal, the open interval signal from 0 to 1 that each individual receives, it only can represent one unidimensional issue. Is this content permissible or not? There is no well kind of consideration, and there is no fuzziness at all. But in real life, lots of issues are actually usually multidimensional. The kinds of biases that we can have for gender, for example, and age, sometimes those things appear at the same time. They could tug on the same directions, different directions. There's all kinds of ways that it can interact. So what is this model saying to us by simply being one-dimensional? This is a big challenge, and the way I'm imagining it right now is, at least for some issues, we can imagine these models stacking on each other to represent a multi-dimensional issue. So if we have some complicated issue, well, there is a dimension of considerations about gender in there, maybe. And there is another dimension of consideration of age in there. And how do moderators improve on how to judge the effect of gender on the permissibility of their content? Well, they talk to other moderators, and the hope is maybe the effect of teamwork can concurrently happen on all kinds of dimensions of issues. That's the hope. Another kind of criticism of this kind of model is this. Some people might say that, look, this model kind of assumes that when moderators begin their work, when they get hired, they are in this kind of conceptual position. As in they haven't talked to anybody. They only have their own opinion in some sense. But some people will say, look, as grown adults, we are all sort of in this kind of position already. Everybody already talked to plenty of people, your uncle, your mentors, everyone is the sort of normative conditions about value, about this and that, everything's already baked in even how we perceive things. It's baked in how we behave. So in this kind of context, in what sense does this model apply? I think that's also a very sharp challenge. And the way I'm imagining this right now is I'm harping on an earlier assumption that I made, that I think it's plausible, that I think it's possible that we can have professional attitude, compartmentalizable professional attitude for moderators, like a city garbage worker, or a nurse, or a judge. This kind of work can carry a certain kind of neutrality on their judgment. You cannot pick on the trash person for judging something for being trash or not. That's their professional, like somebody's personal opinion about how to recycle more efficiently, pull more valuable items out of trash have nothing to do with their work of a city garbage person. They need to follow the guidance of the city garbage person, not their own values of how to recycle, how to organize trash. So I'm hoping that that it's plausible to you guys and also to a lot of other people that it's possible to have professional commercial online content moderation attitudes. That's my hope of solving this kind of worry. And a vestigial worry that I heard some people mention is if we're talking in terms of making 10,000 is a small number in this context for moderation, 10,000 decisions a day, there's going to be some, basically your mental sharpness on that first decision versus that last decision will not be the same. It's a documented phenomenon that, social conditions such as poverty, it inflicts a certain reduction or dampering effect on IQ. And there is something documented as epistemic fatigue or cognitive fatigue. This kind of thing happens throughout the day. People get more tired, and then later in the day is when biases and less reason-based but more quicker decision-making mechanism get called on later in the day. So there's kind of a lot of these practical conditions are all relevant. And I have kind of a umbrella recommendation for any kind of consideration that like this kind of model just doesn't represent human beings enough. I think it might be very fruitful to look into, to do a actual human being analog of this kind of thought experiment. What if we gave pretend moderation judgments to people, have them work in teams, and do veritistic assessment on that basis? Can we produce some effect? Yeah, we can come back to all these things like in the Q&A section. Just very quick, two very quick last remarks about the issue more at large. One broad thing about hate speech I want to say is moderation could be helpful. I think it's necessary, but it can't be the only thing that we do. I don't think anyone's under any delusion that if Facebook organized itself better, then what happened in Myanmar wouldn't have happened. I think perhaps history would have turned out a different way, but I think it's naive to think that if people were more regulated online, that takes hate away. That's not the issue. I heard this a very nice quote from Rowan Atkinson a while ago in an interview. He says the solution to problematic speech is more speech. If BS and crap is overwhelming, overflooding the field, obscuring us, then what we need to do is speak out more, say more content, get more put on better platforms. That is other than moderation. It's at least something that we have to do in conjunction with moderation. And I also want to say one broad thing about moderation, other than hate speech, bigger than hate speech. And I've asked this question to some of our other speakers too. I think there's a bigger question of, especially in this century, what should we do about pluralism? Because pluralism is a fact, and it is also probably a good idea in how we organize society. Lessons from philosophy, science, and biology, for example, it shows us that not all kinds, there might not be a systematic way to understand all existing kinds. And I think it's very much the same thing with social kinds. Traditions, values, these things are hard to unify. But like I asked some other speakers, I also think it's not a good idea to say, oh, there's no normativity. It's all just relative. Well, that can't be true either. So there are these bigger questions that I don't know how to answer. But if we were to take moderation and hate speech seriously, we're going to have to think a lot more about these questions. Yep, here is the content of my talk. And I would love to take questions and criticisms also.
Great. Thank you so much. Pardon, my voice is going. So I think we have time for maybe one, maybe two questions. So we'll open it up. Please feel free to raise your hand or just go ahead and ask your question.
Yes. Hello.
Hi, so thank you. It was very interesting to me to hear. I'm a lawyer, I'm not an economist, so I tried to follow as best I could. And I have a few maybe scattered thoughts or questions. So I think the first thing I always think about is I think the last thing you said about how do we measure hate speech or defamation or slander, because it differs so much between societies. And I think that you also mentioned it that AI systems are, I'm not sure if you said it like that, but they're biased because, well, we know that they are mostly based on the English language. We also know that if you ask them about, let's say, the most important figures in the 19th century, they will mainly find persons from the Anglo-American world. And so I think maybe the problem there, I don't know if it can be solved, but it is not diverse enough, right? It doesn't take into account as many languages as it should, as many cultures as it should. And so I was wondering how your model relate to that or takes this into account. Another thing I thought about is regulating the internet is kind of a hard thing to do, especially if you do it with humans. And so I was wondering if the notions that you speak about, if we can find a good way to do that, if we say that taking the crowd and ask the crowd questions will result in good results, can we build it into our AI models, and then maybe we won't have this problem of employing so many people. So thank you.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much. If I might address your second question first. I hope this is not too off topic, but one of the main things that I personally am learning a lot from the Ukraine war, one of the things is combined arms is a good idea. It's a good idea to not get, here's the technique from this tradition, here's a technique from this tradition. I'm not going to mix them because they're from two different traditions. So I think your idea is fantastic. We should use convergence effect. We should use the Condorcet's jury theorem on digital thinkers as well. There is no reason to restrict this to human being, because the reason convergence works is because if we are inaccurate and imprecise as individuals, and if we are not inaccurate in a particular direction, so if we look at something red, and let's say that human beings are not good at discerning red, then some people see a colder shade, some people see a warmer shade. If we get 25 people to look at a flower together, we will get a better surface reflection property measurement because people are off in both ways. So machines can do this too. We can do this with machine. Actually, I'm pretty sure this is already built into all kinds of algorithms already. Yeah, so I think that's a fantastic idea. There's no reason to restrict this technique to human beings. And if I could address your other question, with societies it's very hard. I want to bring up like another kind of disagreement, the philosophical disagreement. People can disagree on even more abstract level. People can disagree about what to do. People can also disagree about like why we can make these rules, like prior constraints, for example, is an issue that moderation discussants bring up every once in a while. Is it right that we say now what you can say in the future? Like American constitutional scholars, a lot of them, free speech in America is especially permissive, and they say it's the hardest speech to restrict is future speech. right? Because this is the kind of philosophical attitude that these thinkers already took about prior constraints. If you say now what you can't say next, that's a problem. But this is not how a lot of Chinese developers, political organizers think of it. They're very proud of prior constraints. If you mention Xi Jinping in your speech, yeah, that's already problematic speech. So yeah, the almost schism, as it were, between us, I think is not only wide, it's also on many different conceptual levels. There's second order disagreements, third order disagreements. Yeah, I don't know.
Thank you so much for that question. I'm just going to try to keep us on time. So if you do have other questions for our speaker, is it all right if I contact you at your email?
Yes, yes.
Okay, perfect. That's great. So we can continue the conversation on that way. And if we have any time at the end of the session, maybe we can jump back in